George said not a word, with the sounds of the breeze blowing on the river, the only sounds heard with ease. He then heard men shout farther down the river. He heard the shouts get loud, and stopped with a shiver. George took off his hat. "Take off your hat, Lenny," George told his big friend. "The air feels quite lovely down here at the bend." Lenny did as told, and he took off his hat. He laid it on the ground, on the dirt where he sat. "Tell how it's goin' be?" Lenny asked his dear friend. George sat there without a word, staring out at the bend. George began to say, "Look across the river, Lenny, and I'll tell you, so to see it clear." Lenny turned his head and looked across the pool. "We gon' get a little place," George said to the fool. George pulled out a gun. He snapped off the safety. He checked it for bullets that would set Lenny free. George looked at his head where the skull meets the spine. He could hear men shout out, almost like a child's whine. "Go on," said Lenny. "Tell how it's gonna be. We gon' get a little place," and George slumped to one knee. George began to say, "We'll have us a cow, we'll have us a pig, and we'll have us some chickens, just not all so big. And out down the flat we'll have us a little field to fill with alfalfa," George said as he sat. "For the rabbits," Lenny said. "For the rabbits," George assured. "And I get to tend them?" Lenny asked excited. "And you get to tend them," George replied. Lenny turned his head. "No, Lenny, look down there across the river, you see," George said, ready to set Lenny free. Lenny did as told. George looked down at the gun. Footsteps could now be heard, so it had to be done. "Go on, George, tell me. When we gonna do it?" Lenny asked eagerly. "We gonna do it soon," George spat. "Me and you and me. Everybody gonna be nice to you. Ain't gonna be no trouble." The voices came close. George raised his gun steady. He put it to Lenny, at the back of his head, unsure if he was ready. The hand shook violently, yet his face was set. But then his hand steadied. He pulled the trigger. Lenny then fell flat. His body lay in the sand without even a quiver as George laid down his hand. George shivered in quiet, and he looked at the gun. He threw it from him, for the deed was now done.